Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the bell tolls for Pope Francis, a pontiff of historic firsts.
He was the first Latin American pope, the first non-European for more than 1,000 years, and his simple words and humble manner immediately won over the crowds.
After 12 years of leading the Roman Catholic Church, how will the world remember Francis? I'm Manuel Rápalo, and this is The Take. As soon as he stepped out onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in 2013, Pope Francis made history. Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, became the first Jesuit pope and the first non-European to hold the papacy in more than a millennium. But it was his simple words and humble nature that immediately won over crowds.
Don't forget to pray for me. Goodbye.
He was the first to choose Francis as his papal name, inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, the son of a wealthy merchant who gave it all up to live in poverty.
I think that in this world of uncertainty, of anger, of wars, the fact that someone of this stature with this kind of message of reconciliation has died, well, it has definitely left a void.
Our guest today wrote the obituary for Al Jazeera English.
I'm Virginia Pietromarchi. I'm a reporter with Al Jazeera English, and I cover Italy.
Virginia, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Can you tell us what the situation is like? What's the mood like among people in Italy now?
Yes, so obviously, as soon as the news arrived of the death of the Pope earlier this morning, we have already seen footage of hundreds of thousands of people streaming into St. Peter's, La Basilica di San Pietro.
We were happy to see him yesterday, even though it was the last time, and he was very humble and very simple. We have always felt very identified with him and very fond of him. And right now we feel a great sadness. But we also know that it is God's will, and that is what we have to accept.
And you could tell, there was quite of a sober tone mixed with an atmosphere of surprise, because the Pope was, yes, indeed very much sick. But at the same time, we had the idea that he was getting better.
Virginia, it's good to have you here at a time when the spiritual leader for almost 1 in every 5 people on earth has passed away at the age of 88. That's around 1.4 billion Roman Catholics. Before we dive in and talk about the events, let's talk about the circumstances surrounding the death of Pope Francis. What were his last days like?
So Pope Francis suffered from complication due to a double pneumonia. He was 88. Reason why he was hospitalized in mid-February. And for 5 weeks, he was there at the Gemelli Hospital in Rome. And while the Vatican was giving very detailed updates about his state, so of course there was a lot of anxiety about his state, how he was. Some days the updates were extremely grim and complicated, and many times we thought, okay, well, here we are. This is it. But then surprisingly, he got better. And he sent a voice note before being dismissed from hospital, where he sounded extremely weak.
For your prayers for my health from the square, I am with you from here. May God bless you, and the Virgin Mary protect you. Thank you.
And after that, he was dismissed. And he did very few public appearances. One of these was this Sunday, Easter time. And of course, he did not read out his message. He let one of his aides to do that. But again, we thought somehow that he would have needed a lot of recovery. He also met J.D. Vance, U.S. Vice President, where they exchanged Eastern greetings. And then the news this morning, that's why it came by surprise to many.
As you mentioned, meeting with J.D. Vance, even taking that time to be wheeled out toward the balcony and wave to worshipers and tourists in the Vatican as well on Easter. I think that news for many people on Monday morning certainly came as a big shock. You wrote the obituary for Pope Francis for Al Jazeera. In it, you state that Pope Francis will be remembered as a pontiff who pushed church boundaries but didn't break them. Paint this picture for us. Where was Pope Francis a pioneer, and where did he fall short of breaking norms?
So Pope Francis was an extremely charismatic communicator, and definitely he can be credited for broadening the appeal of the church, especially at times when the institution was a bit in the middle of a crisis due to the quite wide range of sexual and financial scandals. So he not only he did that, but he put back to center to the message of the church, the poor, the marginalized, those that are usually on the periphery of the world. And he kind of set the tone straightforward of this new style, they would say, the Pope of the people, since the very early beginning of his papacy. When he was elected in 2013, for example, he approached the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, and he broke the tradition. Basically, instead of blessing the crowds, he asked the people in the crowd to pray for him. He decided not to go around with a Mercedes-Benz, but with a Fiat. And for example, he refused to live in the beautiful last floor papal residence where popes usually goes and live, and instead opted for a much more simple residence. So these are all things that tell us about him breaking from what used to be, this is important to know for context, from a previous papacy of Benedict, which was much stricter. But if we want to go a little bit deeper into more, practical aspect of all of this, he, for example, in a landmark rulings, he kind of he abolished the pontifical secrecy, which means that basically details of process would be then available to legal authorities. He also drastically changed the tone that there used to be towards homosexuality, which had been previously demonized by the church in general.
If a person with homosexual tendencies is a believer and seeks God, who am I to judge?
But at the same time, some critics would argue that these were obviously hugely important overtures in terms of its tone, but he was not bold enough to go to really fundamentally change the church. He was against women becoming priests. He was against gay marriage. So yes, of course, he, for example, made another landmark ruling in terms of allowing priests to give the blessing to homosexual couples, but not within, let's say, religious, not within civil unions or weddings in churches. And so this created a little bit of a friction within the church in terms of those who hoped that actually his message would have translated into fundamental changes, and those instead who thought that anyways he was already going well beyond the lines of what used to be the church lines.
Regardless of how a lot of folks view Pope Francis, he was undoubtedly a trailblazer, and a lot of that has to do with his personal background as well, right? He was the first Jesuit pope, but he was also the first pope from the American continent. He was the first pope from the quote-unquote global south, right? So how did that background, do you think, impact his stances? Who was Jorge Mario Bergoglio before becoming pope?
Yes, so Pope Francis Bergoglio, before becoming Pope Francis, was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, from a very modest family, deeply rooted in Catholic values, working class values. And I believe that his upbringing in such huge cities, he was very much also exposed to economic inequalities, which is a theme that we hear returning constantly in his works, in his messages throughout the world. His criticism of capitalism in general, it's something that would definitely much be a defining characteristic of his papacy. He was also, as you said, very much aware of the role he had as being the first pope to come from the global south, and he made everything possible, imaginable, to open up the church to the wider world and to kind of shift it away from a more Western perspective in that regard.
And there's so much about Pope Francis's past that's celebrated by so many people around the world. I'm from Latin America, and in Latin America, obviously, he's beloved for many reasons, not least of which is because he's from the region. People certainly identified with him very much so across the American continent. But there are still questions that are a little bit ambiguous, I think, about his past, specifically when it comes to his role during the right-wing military dictatorship in Argentina, which is, he was living in Argentina at the time.
Yes, that there is definitely a shadow over his tenure when he was there in Argentina during Argentina's dirty war.
A notorious detention center where thousands of citizens were detained, tortured, and killed during the Argentine military dictatorship.
Many people have no ideas to today what happens to their beloved ones, and some critics argue that Pope Francis did not say enough, did not denounce the regime, did not help those in need by just the same way as other people of the church had moved back in the days. He later said that he did not know of the scale of what was happening, but again, some critics refuse this and say there was no way to not know what was going on in the country back then.
After the break, more with Virginia. So Virginia, I know people, all over the world, Muslims, Christians, Jewish people, atheists who absolutely loved Pope Francis. Can you talk about how it wasn't just about his personality? He made an actual effort to reach out across faiths, to find commonality among faiths and commonality among cultures. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, for example, he was the first pope to visit the Arabian Peninsula, which was massive. Again, no pope had done that before. And he was very much close, was very much beloved in for example, in the region, in the Middle East. He was quite of a big advocate, for the rights of Palestinians to have their own state.
I think of the people of Gaza and its Christian community in particular, where the terrible conflict continues to cause death and destruction and to create a dramatic and deplorable humanitarian situation.
He kind of went further also in kind of criticizing Israel's for the war in Gaza, even suggesting that there should be an investigation to check on whether Israel was committing or not a genocide in Gaza. All things that were seen by many as exposing himself in a way that maybe other popes would have not done.
That's really where he broke apart as well with other Western states on foreign policy. We've seen it over the course of the last year and a half, longer now since the start of the war on Gaza, the way that the Pope was frequently vocal, frequently departing from the sort of statements that we were hearing from other Western countries on foreign policy.
Yes, 100%. And I would add another, let's say, domain where he actually, again, it was not completely aligned with Western country leaders. One of the sort of foreign policy issue where he received wider criticisms was towards his stance on the war in Ukraine. In that sense, some believe that he was not bold enough, or that he somehow was accused of strategically being too neutral, for example, in not naming Russia or Russian President Vladimir Putin as the aggressor, and mentioning the fact that NATO was barking at Russians' door, to use his words, as one of the reasons why the war started, which is obviously a narrative that you might not find that easily in Western capitals, but you would find it much more at the Kremlin.
So, Virginia, let's talk about foreign policy, because as you mentioned, Pope Francis was making announcements calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Vatican City has the smallest standing army in the world, but the head of state still has a lot of say in what happens on the global stage. Tell me how you feel Pope Francis's papacy will be remembered with respect to foreign policy.
Well, I'm not sure how the majority of the people will remember him, but definitely we can say on paper that he was a very active in global politics, not just related to the wars that there has been, of course, Ukraine and Gaza, where he also took a stance. But I would also like to point out something that none of the popes before him did, which was dedicating a full encyclica to the issue of global warming. So Laudato Si, he wrote it in 2015, and he has been regarded by some as a watershed moment in terms of climate policy, because he was framing the issue of climate change not just as a matter of politics and economy and the environment, but as a spiritual and social issue. So for that, definitely among the environmentalists, he will be very much remembered. But beyond this, he was very active till his last moment. It's quite notorious that there was quite a lot of clash with the policies of US President Donald Trump, especially on migration. He was very much preaching the opposite of President Trump in terms of, he was more into building bridges rather than walls. He was never shy about the fact that he did not have great sympathies for Trump's policy. There was this picture from Trump's first visit to Italy, I believe, where his face, you can tell he's just standing there next to Trump. Trump is smiling and he's very much upset with the guy. And again, on Gaza, he was very much active. He's known that he used to call almost every day the Catholic priests in Gaza to check on what was happening.
Yusuf.
Buonasera, Santo Padre.
Buonasera, come stai?
Sto bene, grazie a Dio. Mi scusa, è stato con il Santa Messa.
Ah, con la messa.
Virginia, let's circle back to today and what happens next. For those who are unfamiliar with Vatican protocol, the Vatican is a millenary institution. Maybe you could help us understand a little bit better what happens next in terms of the mechanism that's now in place and the procedures to choose a substitute.
So when a pope dies, there is a very precise process and procedure which has been going on for ages, or very, very long time. And basically, all the cardinals under the age of 80 are supposed to gather at the Vatican and vote and basically get out of the Vatican only when 2/3 of the majority agree on the same name. They vote on a piece of paper, and if that 2/3 majority is not reached, the Vatican will basically make a black smoke. And if they have not reached a majority, then we'll have to go on another round and another round until this 2/3 is reached, and the Vatican releases white smoke.
We want to hold off before any color will be determined.
Let's fight.
That's
but
good timing.
It appears to be white. It is very much white.
Indeed.
And you can see
so
the
then
cheers.
we have a new pope.
I think that's the one thing that most people do know about is the black smoke versus the white smoke, and then the announcement of we have a new
and basically
pope.
That's why, you see these massive crowds gathering there, because each day could be the day where everybody's looking there if there's going to be the white or the black smoke. So it's a big event itself in Rome.
You know, one thing that I think is interesting is the way that the conclave itself was changed under Pope Francis.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting things of Pope Francis' papacy, because these cardinals, which have been appointed by Pope Francis, made up about nearly 80%, to be precise, 79% of the body of cardinals that then goes to elect the next pope. Now, the characteristics of these new cardinals is that most of them come from what Pope Francis regarded as the periphery of the world. We're talking about Myanmar, Lesotho, and countries, Mongolia, representative, basically cardinals that would not have a say years ago. And the second thing is that they are somehow all comes from a pastoral background. So they are people from the ground, from the field, who have this sort of hands-on approach. And so while we don't know who is going to be elected, because obviously there are also a lot of Western European white popes in the mix for who is going to be next, for sure we know that due to the nature of this, let's call it assembly, it's already reflecting a church that has changed.
That was going to be my next question, because we know that change is coming, change has happened. What do you think that change is going to look like?
I think that while we are not sure of who is going to be the next pope, definitely this new conclave will be less European. It will be more about the global south, which a much broader and more inclusive understanding of the world.
And that's The Take. How does Pope Francis's memory live with you? Comment below. We'll be reading through. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. That's where you'll find all of our recent content, updated regularly so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. See you tomorrow.